Right. Hi, everybody.
Yep. Hello.
Hello.
Unfortunately, I have a commercial on mine.
Yeah. You're not sub to your own channel. I guess you can't be, can you?
Yeah.
No worries. Will one of you be able to watch the chat in case anyone asks any questions?
There we go.
I am watching
Hello.
chat now.
Ah, Kurt has arrived. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry I'm late.
No,
No
you're not
problem.
late. We're late, if anything.
Yeah, technically, we're 20 minutes late. Sorry about that,
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Name is Rob. I've heard from my physics friend Darren.
Okay. Commercial's over. We're up.
Hi, everyone.
Greetings. So we have two
Hi.
guests today. One from the UK and one from Japan, I believe.
I am in Japan. I'm originally from America, but yes, I currently make my abode in rooms that look like this.
Yeah. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah. So introductions.
Can you guys go first?
Yeah, my name's Rezo. I'm the technical person. I don't speak
Uh,
much.
Hello, Rezo.
Yeah. My name's Christopher. I'm CEO of Fool's Moon Entertainment Incorporated.
Nice. Cool.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'll go first. I'm Darren Osterk. I run Adderstone Games, I guess, and we make a Celtic mythology inspired tabletop role playing game based on Celtic mythology, specifically Welsh Celtic mythology, set in ancient Iron Age fantasy Britain. And I design the game and write the game, and we're currently working on a campaign book which will be releasing shortly called Against the Faerie Queene. And Kurt is one of my wonderful co-writers, and I guess he can say hi, and then we can talk about where we're from and how did we got here, I guess.
Yeah. I'm Darren's human sounding board, and occasional assistant in writing stuff. So whenever he has crazy ideas or needs crazy ideas, he'll often chat with me about it, and then we'll put it together. Is that right, Darren? That right?
That's right, Kurt.
So you mentioned a little bit earlier, just before we went on air, that you're in Cardiff, and you've
Yes.
been looking up Celtic mythology and such. Have you heard of the role playing game? It was a French role playing game called Keltia.
I believe I have, yes. I don't think I read the rules for it, though.
Yeah.
I think we have another commercial break. It's telling me ad break in progress.
Is that
Uh,
for everyone or just for you?
I think
Question
it's for
mark.
everyone. I'm the one who's actually on the technical side of the stream, so I'm hoping that it's telling me that everybody has a break and it is ending
yeah,
in 1 second.
I'll let you know if it happens.
And it says we're
So far, it
good.
doesn't look like it.
Must have just been on the technical side then.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm curious about that. So, yeah, I've seen some other like Celtic fantasy games and so on, but often they actually take place in like actual historical periods, of historical Wales or historical Britain or what have you. I guess
Yeah.
our world will be different, where it's heavily inspired by those worlds, but it's its own
Ah.
fantasy world.
So kind of a
Yeah.
parallel Earth type thing, but inspired by Celtic mythology.
Yeah,
Awesome.
exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We didn't want to be beholden to history. We didn't want anyone to point to any particular tribes and say they weren't there at that time and all that stuff. So we wanted to have the complete freedom to enjoy the mythos, as it were.
Yeah. Keltia is they're doing kind of like a historical Arthurian thing.
Yeah, I see a lot of that as well. Is it kind of romanticized, kind of medieval Roman mythology or Iron Age?
I think it's Iron Age. It's been a
Okay,
long
cool.
time since I looked at the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I picked up that one and Yggdrasil for the Norse stuff, and apparently it's compatible. So I just have to
Cool.
convince my players that they actually want to play it.
Yeah,
Fair
that
enough.
can be a
That's the
challenge sometimes. My best tip is to create your own game and find fans and then force them to play it. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
they want to play it, really.
At crossbow point.
Yeah. No, I my loving my my loving supporters play eagerly. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us about the game setting.
Oh gosh. So Legends of Avallen is our game. It's released and distributed by Modifius
Oh,
Entertainment.
nice.
Very nice.
Yeah. So they're based in the UK and they picked us up. Legends of Avallen is a game where you don't begin as a hero or mythical legend as of yet. You start as a humble townsperson. We joked when we first started creating the game that you begin at level -3. This is before you're an adventurer. You're just a blacksmith. You're just a humble farmer or a shepherd. And you want something more from the world. And then you venture out and then you discover the other world, the Fae, the legends, make a name for yourself. And then you learn how to fight and how to use magic and choose a class and that kind of thing. And because of that, the game really, well, when you first start and make your character doesn't have all the bells and whistles that a typical RPG character begins with if you're playing your Dungeons and Dragons or that kind of thing. You're just a blacksmith or you're just a farmer. So instead, the game really relies on teamwork and cooperation between the players to push themselves forwards in the gameplay and in the narrative. And then later on, you learn how to use magic and fighting, and those augment the teamwork. That's the fundamental core of the game. And then you become a legend, and then you take a legendary path and become a druid or a Fey touched, or even take on some of the Raxian influences, which are a Roman analog, and become a gladiator or a primus or that sort of thing. So we try to span the whole gamut of zero to hero, as it were.
Yeah.
Very cool.
There's an RPG called Maelstrom that came out a while back, set in the Tudor period. And all the character classes in that were normal common folk. There's nothing special about them. And unlike yours, you stay normal folk with nothing special about you through the entire thing. The one exception is you could theoretically be a wizard or a paid assassin, and those were probably the most interesting of all the classes, except for the wizard has the tendency to blow themselves up because magic is supposed to be coincidental. If it doesn't, it theoretically could tear a hole in reality called a maelstrom and suck them in.
Hence the name, I see. We have a similar thing, but not quite as dire. Magic's dangerous, but it won't hurt your friends. It will just hurt you for dabbling in it.
Yeah. Somebody on the stream suggested that they want to play a layabout.
A layabout. That is not technically a profession that we have in our game, I don't think, Kurt. Is that right?
Like a scavenger, you can be like a scavenger, right?
Oh yeah, you could be a scavenger. Yeah. That's
pretty close to being a layabout. And then after that, if you learn to play an instrument, you could be, like a bard or a musician type. That's also traditionally, that could be someone who lays about. As a musician, I've met a lot of guys like that. So yeah, you can.
But that's
definitely
work.
not get a career.
Couch servers.
Somebody else was bringing up. How about kind of like the archetypical fool, the person that lives with their parents and wind up getting into hijinks and stuff like that? Is that possible through the game?
Someone who lives with the parents. I think a necessary conceit of the character you make is that you want to go out into the world. So that's not quite there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So not the classic fairy tale hero's journey, but something a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, but that said, of the fool though, there is a really important personality system in the game where we follow the hero's journey. Kurt, you can talk about the hero's journey for a moment, can't you? I'm sure you can talk about it for hours if I asked you to.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I can talk about it for hours, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure if you're a nerd, everyone's familiar with the whole Joseph Campbell of the hero sort of traversing and crossing the border and meeting the goddess and then coming back, that whole thing. And obviously, there's a lot of different ways to tell it and so on. But rather than experience levels like in this game, rather than just getting experience points and so on, you're looking to achieve objectives throughout the game, which will then take you down a hero's path and do things where you have to complete specific objectives in order to advance down your path. So if you're starting as a layabout, you do have to sort of transverse and cross over and choose a path of herodom from your sort of profession. As again, I would suggest a scavenger for that. And choosing something else like a Telu or or a well, I guess before that would be something like a Ravager or a warrior type path. And then from that you could take a legendary path. And then once you sort of come full circle, then yeah, you could end back at layabout. But what's important is that you sort of go through that down that path, and then you have to go through a transformative change before you earn your hard rest.
Yeah, exactly.
Can,
So at the start of the game, you get to pick, you have to pick a motivation to why it is that you want to go out and prove yourself in the world. And you also have a virtue and a flaw that you have to play off of. And as you progress through the game, you can start taking burdens relating to your flaw, and then you can redeem them later. And so there's a little cycle that happens here that encourages you to play out your character. And then as you reach different tiers in your legendary journey, you get to reflect on your character's motivation, virtue, and flaw, and maybe make some changes if you think that your character's been altered through the journey. And then, as Kurt said, you end up arriving back at the beginning of the circle of the hero's journey, and you get to decide whether you're a legend of virtue, or if you accept your flaws and become an anti-hero in a way. Yeah.
It reminds me, in a number of isekai, the Japanese story of person goes to a fantasy world, things like that. More than once, the goals for the character there is like, I want an easy life. I want to be able to relax and chill and just, not have any troubles. And I have to go through hell to do that. So they have to go through another quest, just to make things nice.
Yeah.
We have a question actually on the stream. Would Legend of Avallen ever branch out into other cultures' mythology? And if so, what would you do to keep the same spirit of Avallen without coming across as stereotypes or cultural appropriation, like if you used Native American or African mythology?
That's a fantastic question, and I have so many things that I want to say about it, and I'm sure Kurt does as well. I would say that two things to begin with, and that ties into the previous topic we're talking about the hero's journey, and as you said, like isekai, moving into the unknown worlds. Like the key part of our world of Avallen is that there is the other world, the world of the Fae and the gods, and this is a place that you can stumble into by accident and then become lost inside and have to find your way back again. There's literally that journeying into a new world and crossing the threshold that happens that makes you become an adventurer. And I was really enamored with the idea that made me latch on to Celtic mythology. But then when I really thought about it, I was like, well, that kind of otherworldly experience exists in a lot of cultures, mythologies. And I've been seriously considering about expanding the world beyond Avallen, because I know there's more to the world out there. And knowing that kind of link of otherworldly realms of the gods that you can stumble into is very present in other, I guess, pre-monotheistic religions.
Animistic.
Yeah, exactly. In Iron Age cultures, especially, that tying thread between them all would be something that I probably want to use as a stepping stone to link them and make it uniform across the worlds. Kurt, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah. So, and I think one interesting thing about our world, and the reason why it's based on Celtic Roman mythology and not set in Celtic Roman mythology, is there's a lot of things, in the past. I mean, not based in like ancient Iron Age, Rome and Wales, is the fact that we're able to sort of use a lot of those trappings, but we also wanted to leave behind some of the more problematic things, right?
So, you don't want to be beholden to it.
Yeah, exactly. And slavery, for example, is a big example of that, where it's not such a huge part of our world, whereas slavery was like a huge part of the ancient world. And also, but what that means that our version of the Roman Empire, the Rex Empire, is a different take on that, where they used to have their own other world, but through like reason and logic and this pursuit of this kind of state of what they call ataraxia or enlightenment, they've kind of destroyed the supernatural in the world, and they become this kind of empire of the mind. And when they expand out, a lot of the empires they go through, you do see that in Avallen through that empire. So you do have people from other cultures coming over who present, similar to our real world cultures, whether it's Black or Asian or whatever. Of course, they're not called Africa or Asia in our world and so on. But you have the flexibility to make characters that represent you, even though you're still playing into this kind of fantasy setting. And so that is definitely something Darren and I have been talking about, of doing more Iron Age cultures in this world. But like you said, leaving behind the things that that you wouldn't want to play in, because a person like me would not, being an Asian presenting person, wouldn't be able to probably be a high powered figure in the Roman Empire. But in our world, you can be, because it's based more on a rationalistic point of view rather than something based just on, the innate superiority or whatever of one's culture.
Yeah,
Does that
and
sound that with you, Darren?
yeah, 100%. And we're also really lucky as well in that we're a very small team, but we've got a lot of cultures represented amongst us, and so we all really want to tie and tap into that stuff. So I'm half English and half Turkish,
Oh,
and
nice.
I'm really into the old Turkic mythology from the steppes. Like, we're descended from wolves, much like the Romans are in a way, I guess. And then a lot of our co-writers happen to be Filipino. I don't know why so many of them are, but they are. And we have Brazilian artists, and we have a strong connection to Japan as well. A lot of us met in Japan, and yeah, so we're keen to spread our wings across the real and mythological globe a bit. Yeah.
That's really cool. I have a friend who's from Hungary, and
Oh,
I
awesome.
actually asked him about the mythology and the history of Hungary, and he's like, it's very hard to find any Hungarian mythology. Most
Yeah.
of it's been buried, and I was like, well,
Yeah.
that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
I myself, I got very much into where I am now, thanks to studying Japanese culture and history and Shinto and things like that. Enough so that I actually signed up with the Shinto Shrine just north of Seattle. So,
Oh, cool.
yeah, and I mean, my first published RPG is Fox Magic, which is all about Shinto and Japanese mythology. I would have really liked to have the contact with people that I do now that I had then, but the internet didn't exist yet.
Right.
Right.
It did, just not
Did
in
you ever
this.
get into L5R?
Oh, I'm a fan of L5R. I love the original game engine from second edition. I absolutely despise fifth edition.
I see.
Well,
Right.
okay, my reasoning is this: first and second edition were very high fantasy, like a strong presence of mythology. You had the spirits, the kami, the oni, and all this other stuff. I kind of wish it wasn't pulling so hard on Western culture as part of it, but what can you do? But with each generation after second edition, it was less fantastical. It became more focused on samurai drama, and like the magic and all the strange creatures and all that kind of stuff were kind of pushed to the wayside. And when fifth edition came out, it's not even high fantasy anymore. It's very much low fantasy, gritty samurai drama. And that's
Yeah.
not what I signed up for.
I mean, I don't want to put down on other games, but part of my motivation for making Legends of Avallen was to re-ground the fantasy and make the world mysterious again. And I did, I guess, instill two things primarily into the world and the gameplay to ensure that happens. One, obviously, you start without magic, you start without fighting powers, you're just a humble person.
Yeah.
And so the world is intimidating because of that reason, and you have to venture out and then learn these things later on. And also fun as well is that you get to start at something this, and then when you get to level 1, after you played an adventure and you've played with the system a little bit, now you get to decide, oh, do I want to learn magic, or do I want to learn how to fight, and that kind of thing. So it's just fun in your own way. That's a separate topic. And the other thing as well is I wanted to make sure that the world felt mysterious. Like you have to play as a human.
Yeah.
You're a human. Sorry, that's what we are. There are elves out there. There are dwarves out there, but you're going to have to discover them, and you're going to have to meet them and find them. And that was just, I had not a lot of pushback, but I had a lot of people saying, oh, can I play a fae? Can I play an elf? That kind of thing. I was just like, no, you can't. So,
They're not normal.
Yeah, they're not normal, and you have to go out and find them. But later on in the game, you can take a legendary path like the Fae Touched, and then you can gain Fae powers, and you can grow your Fae horns and your Fae eyes, and get your wings and your tail, and become part Fae if you want to be. But you have to get there first. You have to start somewhere from this hero's journey, from the basic and the primal, and then go out and find this stuff.
Yeah.
So that was really important to me. And another key part of it as well in the Celtic mythology is that the other world, you can never know what to expect from it, and it gives a lot of freedom to the game master as well. They can do whatever they want in the other world. There's almost no rules there. So they get to be really creative, and the player's never going to know what they might come across when they step into there. So I think that's really important for the mystery and fantasy of our fantasy tabletop role-playing games.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you guys are looking outward at like other cultures and stuff and how they're going to intersect. With most fantasy RPGs, my complaint is that a lot of it is built on Western idealism and Western concepts and stuff like this. And I'll ask them, it's like, okay, so you have your culture here, your kingdom, whatever. What's beyond those borders? Well, will we ever see that? And my usual answer I get is, oh, we might do that later. Or they're like, well, that's not the focus of the game. And I'm like, it's an entire world. What happens when the players want to come from those other parts and come in? And the usual answer is that they don't. And I find that very disappointing.
Yeah. Well, I can speak as a game designer to begin with. Obviously, when it was our first ever project, this was just an idea for a game system that I wanted to make where it encouraged teamwork and humble beginnings and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And as a first project with a tiny team, which is 2 to 3 people, you have to limit your scope and you have to focus on one thing primarily.
Yeah.
But as you say, but there's always more out there. And so recently for the new campaign book that we're working on against the Faerie Queene, for example, a couple of things happened. One of which was that our backers on the crowdfunding, they had the option to go for a higher pledge and have a character put into the campaign book and have artwork done for them, that kind of thing. And one of them asked for a Japanese-inspired character. And I went, oh boy, here we go. Now I've got to figure out what this means. We're going to have to put this into our world now. It's going to be there and they're going to be from somewhere. And I have to think about it. So I spent ages doing all the research and coming up with the ideas. And this all down in notes. You won't see much of it in the campaign book, but it's now there and it's part of the world in the background. And we might get there one day. So I think the reason why you get that response a lot is because small teams have to limit their scope. But yes, you're right. Excuse me. You have to think outside the box. And when you add in these little bits, and now you've got to start poking out into the world and seeing what's out there. And I'm excited for it. Yeah.
Well, I remember they found recently in a Scandinavian, like an ancient Viking Nordic grave, they had like symbols from India. Like they had
yes.
So it's like, cultures do kind of mingle and travel.
Yeah,
so
I can speak on this. No, it's completely possible. I'll speak on it for a moment. And I feel bad. Sorry, Kurt, you haven't said anything for a while, but this is really important to me. So when I'm from England, moved to Wales, and wanted to make a Celtic inspired fantasy game inspired by the locale that I live in. I became really inspired by the Welsh language and things like that and history. And I would advertise it on Facebook. And part of the advertising would show the characters. And most of my characters are Welsh or Celtic inspired white folk from Britain, but many are not as well. There are black characters. There's all sorts of characters of different skin shades and whatever. And I would get some bloody awful comments in the Facebook threads saying, what the hell is this character doing in your Celtic fantasy? I mean, ignore the part that's fantasy, but Celtic world and that kind of thing. It just blows my mind. They just don't understand or do the reading. Like, I did the reading, and I know for a fact, two facts that turned up that I love. One, the first birthday invitation was found in Britain. It's from a Roman noble lady to another who wrote to a friend of hers in Hadrian's Wall, inviting her to a birthday party in Londinium, which is very cute and wonderful. But two, we know that there were hired mercenaries from the Middle East stationed at Hadrian's Wall. Like, that's just awesome. Like, the world was so much more connected than we'd have thought. Without Celtic items in Africa and African ivory in Celtic graves, like there are people moving around all the time. It was not as small as we thought it was. And I try to push back on that as much as I can whenever I get the opportunity to, because people just, they want to live in a little world and they want the old world to be little too. And it just wasn't, and it never was, whether they like it or not, really. Yeah.
Good for you. Kurt, you got something to say?
Sorry, Kurt.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like the sort of focus on only us European type thing is, I don't know, if you think about it, a little bit more recent, right? Like in the sense that if a lot of people who we play their games and they focus on media where I'm an Asian guy. who loves like games and nerdy things, right? And I never really felt, quote unquote, represented until even more recently. But a lot of stuff that the media that I love is really like post Tolkien and so on, right? And who himself was a historian, and like what Darren's saying, if you dig deep into history, that human history is long, and
Human history is long.
people human history is a lot longer than we think it is, right?
Yeah.
So it's like definitely if and even aside from that, like I want to play like people that look like me too, and if we have a spot like that in our game for people like us and people like you, I think that's 100%
Yeah.
okay, right? Like
And we do. There are characters that look like you, Kurt.
Yeah, I know,
Yeah.
I'm
And so that's the
Sure.
important part in the rulebook as well. Because in the rulebook we have our different clans that live in Avallen. We have the Pendraig, that you might have heard the Pendragon, Uther Pendragon, that kind of things. The Pendraig, the Penavank, the Penlevi, the Pencaur, and the Penbaev. And then there's also the Raxians, our Roman equivalent. And there's all these different cultures listed in the rulebook to explain what kind of things you can latch onto. But then there's also elsewhere. We also have a section called elsewhere. And we say that, you can be from elsewhere as well. That's cool. Everyone's coming to this place. The empire is vast. It touches lots of different places. There's no reason why you can't be here if you don't want to be here from wherever you're from. And you can be from elsewhere, and you can own that and be here too. And that's not a problem. Yeah, that's part of the game.
With going elsewhere, you could basically just say, here's the different locations. Here's like a brief paragraph on each of them. So if you want to be from elsewhere, at least you have a stepping stone to draw from.
Yeah, 100%. And we have a little quote in the book from someone from elsewhere. There's a soldier who's been conscripted, and he expresses that he's not Raxian. He's from somewhere else, and he's been brought in, and he understands your frustrations and that kind of thing. And that was normal back then too. Yeah.
And actually,
my first
one of the kings.
Go ahead.
Sorry, one of the kings is also from in one of the clans, the Pendraig, is also from elsewhere, but he was like sort of discovered on the shores of his kingdom as a boy, and then adopted by the clan. But because of his sort of wit and the strength of his mind and his aptitude for magic, he gets promoted and takes in control of his tribe within the clan. So yeah, like I think one of the main things with a lot of the clans and the ancient culture is they do recognize strength in all its forms in order to sort of look to for leadership.
Nice. Yeah. One of my games, I'm not going to be flogging my own games for this, but it's set in Japan. It's completely Japanese themed, and I've had people go, well, can we be from elsewhere? And I'm like, of course, why not? In fact, one of the adventures I ran was set in San Francisco, like a little Tokyo. And it's like, yeah, when they moved there, the mythology moved there, and the supernatural moved there too with them. So why not? And with our expansion, we're looking at Korea, we're looking at China, we're looking at Europe, we're looking at Native America, so it's good to be able to draw from other sources and take a look at the parallels.
Yeah, 100%.
And doing it definitely, obviously, in a respectful way where it comes off as
definitely
appreciation for the culture and so on. Like I live in Japan. I'm not Japanese. I'm actually Filipino, like Darren mentioned, like half of his crew. But yeah, at the same time, I'm aware of that too. Not being Japanese, I still have an affinity for Japanese culture and respect for it. So I'm glad to hear that you're also spreading that, because it's fun. There's a lot of great stuff, obviously, in lots of different cultures.
I would like to touch on the Filipino at some point. I found there's a Filipino D20 RPG out there, and that blew my mind. I was so happy to see that. I had a few friends in the Philippines, and if I'm not mistaken, because what I got from them is the mythology there is thriving. Like, you see in, like, when you're hearing about like early Celtic storytelling and stuff like this, it's like if you go out into the countryside or you walk around, you find weirdness. If you look at the old Japanese stories, you walk around in the countryside, you find weirdness. And this person was like, yeah, right now in the modern time, if you go out into the countryside, you find weirdness and you have to be careful because it's really scary out there. And I was like, oh, wow, that's actually kind of interesting. You don't get that really that much in the West. Like, you don't go, well, I was walking down the streets of Kansas and this really scary thing happened that's supernatural. That you don't hear that often.
That's not exactly true. It's more along the lines of cryptids, though.
Yeah.
It's like this guy got taken by, Mothman. and stuff
Yes,
like that. So
cryptids. Yeah.
it's still weird, but the thing is you also got to look at how long American history is.
Yeah.
Um, for the most part, we're all settlers from other countries. And
Yeah.
we brought our mythology here, and there was mythology and culture here before that. And that's
Hmm.
been kind of buried and covered up. And so we only have 200 years to draw from, whereas, overseas we have thousands of years to draw from.
Yeah.
I definitely consider myself pretty, and I think Darren probably agrees to this, that we're both pretty rationalistic, right? If
Yeah.
we see something straight, oh well, it's probably this and so on. And my family growing up, is very religious and superstitious. So before I was rationalistic, I was definitely afraid that these things called aswangs would come out. Aswangs are like
Yeah.
a Filipino vampire whose lower body detaches and tries to attack you. Because that's the story your parents would tell you to either because they believe in it, or B because they want to mess with you. And it's probably just a combination of those two things.
Yeah.
And I guess I think what you're talking to is definitely that culture
Mhm.
and so other areas of the world that are not America. Sometimes I do play into that for various reasons, and one of it is that's just part of our culture, and you share that with people. So
Yeah. My friend was talking about some kind of water horse in the Philippines. I was like, huh, they have those too. Well, yeah, it kind of makes sense. But the thing with all these mythologies and stuff crossing over, I look for parallels, and I'm like, okay, yeah, so you have this culture here, and they have this and this and this, and that's very similar to this culture that is way over there, and you can kind of see where they can link up when you start working on fiction and things like that. There was a voodoo exhibit at a local museum, VODOU, as opposed to VOODOO, which is a separate thing entirely. And when I was looking at it, I was like, there's a lot of Shinto that like parallels to the voodoo culture, and the respect for the ancestors and the spirit world, and everything is alive and things like that. And is like, it's very nice to see that kind of thing.
I think you have another question in the chat, Kid.
I do. Okay. Here we go. With all of the kerfuffle with Wizards of the Coast with keeping things open for third-party use, would Switch the next game you create Avallen game in another tabletop mechanic? Do y'all have something else already in mind, like Pathfinder or something? It's not even D20, is it?
Yeah, so the Against the Faerie Queene campaign book is written for Legends of Avallen primarily, which is our own original game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a card-based game. Uses a deck of playing cards.
Mm-hmm.
And the core game mechanics revolve around flipping cards, and you're hoping for black cards if you're making a mental check, which is Spirit or Wit, and you're hoping for red cards if you're making a physical check, which is Vigor and Agility, each assigned to a certain suit. And the key part of the gameplay is that you can get multiple advantages for every check that you make. So you're really relying on your teamwork and your environment to find things that help you achieve your objective. And then for every advantage that you accrue from your allies or your environment, you get extra cards to flip. And then you take the best from among them. And if you fail, you gain what's called an edge, which is a card you keep face down that you can then push forward to other checks in the future. So there's kind of like a fail forward mechanic there, where even though you fail, you still gain an edge in the situation because you made some kind of progress. So the game begins really simple, and in that way, I've explained it to you in a couple of seconds. But then, of course, there's how do you cast spells, or you have to prepare them in rituals, and different spells at different levels of complexity. So you have to build up your advantages by preparing your ritual and having your robes and your charm with you, so you can match the complexity with your own advantages to cancel them out. And maybe you want to make the spell bigger, so that increases the complexity even more. So you ask your friends to help you cast a spell, so they join in, and you're always contributing together to get as many advantages as you can for all your checks. Another key difference between our system and lots of other role-playing games is that we don't have HP or anything like that. Instead, we have a condition system, and you're either wounded and dying, or you're not those things. But a key part of it is that your equipment can be exerted and can become broken as well. So before you become wounded, you might want to exert yourself, which means you're tired, but at least you dodge that attack. But now you can't do that again until you go a short rest. And then the next attack hits you, maybe you break your shield. Well, now you've stopped the attack, but your shield's broken. Now you can't defend with it. And then you break your armor, and then you become wounded. So we wanted the game to be very narrative driven, even though it's very mechanical and gameplay driven. You get to say, guys, I'm exerted, my shield's broken, my armor's broken, the next hit is going to wound me. We're not in a good situation right now. I think we should get out of here. And you can clearly see your character dwindling down. And now you might start thinking about escaping. But it's something's happened in the game that you can point to. And then later on, this is where the professions come back in again. Your friend who's a blacksmith, well, they can repair your armor. And that kind of thing. So our game's really different for D20, really. It's completely different. But I understand the question. Sorry to interrupt you. I understand the question. We've also made this campaign against the Faerie Queene compatible with D20. And we were able to do that because, well, a campaign book's mostly a story. And so we have the rule, we have the story, we have the scenes and the characters. And then every time a rule thing comes up important, we'll have a D20 complementary part underneath it, essentially. So the campaign book is for both, but it's primarily for our original game. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, you're talking about exerting and weapons and such breaking.
Yeah.
This would be one of the reasons people would be carrying multiple weapons, because you exert on your weapon breaks, well, you need to have a backup and a backup and a backup. So yeah, that's actually pretty good because it causes characters to be a little bit more versatile than like in a D20 game where it's like, I have my sword and I have my bow and that's all I need, So you're talking about using a card game mechanic. I played one, Castle Falkenstein. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I'm not actually. That's one I did do. Yeah. I had to research what all the other card games, and that one didn't come up. Was it Castle?
Yeah. Castle Falkenstein. Yes, it's done by Voitisalian Games, RTG. Same people who did Cyberpunk. The one thing I had to worry about is that the players were very meta with the cards. It's like, if you're playing the card of the right suit to your attribute, you get the face value of the card. If you play any other suit, it's worth 1 point. So people would basically start storing their cards in their hands and keeping the really high cards for when they need it.
That was my biggest. So when I did my research, that was my biggest gripe with all of the card-based systems. Was that you'd have a hand of cards in front of you, and that leads to exactly what you're talking about. So we deliberately don't do that. You don't have a hand of cards in front of you. You just flip cards on the top of the deck, kind of like a random reveal, like a dice roll in a way. And the game started using dice, but we really wanted to emphasize the teamwork and everyone working together to get as many advantages as possible. And then we had this issue of like, how many dice are we rolling now? And it just got a bit complicated. And then one playtester, always listen to your playtesters, said, why don't you try using cards? And I said, role-playing games don't use cards. But we tried it and it just works better, just lining all the cards up and flipping them all. And so we went from there, and then, the game was born and so on.
I think that answers the question I was about to ask was, what style of cards are you using? Are you using the standard 52, 54 deck, or are you using a 78 Celtic deck?
We are no, we're using the standard deck of poker cards, with the jokers included, 54 cards, because we wanted it to be really easy for people to get a hold of. We did make our own like special Celtic themed cards for the game. I guess they're blurring out now. That have artwork from the mythology of the world. And we're making another deck of cards for the newest campaign as well, which they're beautiful. But you can just use any normal deck of cards. Yeah.
Could I make a suggestion? This is just me. Try maybe writing an advanced system for your Magic that might use the 78, that might use the major arcana. Just because you're going back to Celtic and Oracle stuff in your campaigns, you might want to use that.
Yeah, I had a thought on that, but Kurt, did you about to say something?
Oh yeah.
Kurt. Well, I mean, I recalling sort of the era of when we were developing the game. I think part of the reason why Darren also went with the 52 deck of cards is he was able to. He's a math nerd, so he was able to crunch the numbers pretty exactly using the standard deck of cards that we're all familiar with, and so the system is pretty well balanced based off of his sensibility there. But I think another cool thing about the system is the cards aren't just used for checks, but there's other systems within the game like journeying, chasing, and sort of this idea of fate creating complications for you in your adventure that also uses the deck of cards, which is also helped by the sort of consistency of the statistics involved, which I would love to hear Darren talk about, because I know he loves to gush about his brilliant mechanics.
But as for what you asked, Rezo, about the major arcana and that kind of thing, that is something that I've had in mind And that's just part of the conceits of designing games, as you say, is like there's the core game, and I wanted to use the deck of normal playing cards, so that's what I'm restricted to. But as you say, you can do an advanced version and you can include those things. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, 100%. You got my brain whirling. I'll have to put that aside while we're talking.
I was working on an RPG which uses tarot symbology in it, and so I started looking at the history of tarot, the Triumphi deck, and stuff like this. It's very hard to pin down how many cards were in the set because that fluctuated through history.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was looking at, it's like, here's all the major arcana, and then it's like, but in this time period, in this location, this was the major arcana, and it's a lot smaller. And this one, it's like, I think like 8 cards in the major arcana, and this one's had different meanings, and this one wasn't here, and that one wasn't here, and oh, it was a mess. Which is annoying though, because for the game I was working on, I have to keep all of those in mind because of people collecting the cards to use in setting. So
I guess there's also the accessibility aspect, right? Like, yeah, the nice thing about the game is if you just learn to play the game, everyone has a deck of cards, yeah. I assume. But not everyone has a tarot deck lying around, unfortunately. But
I have 3 decks of cards within reach, and one of them is from a French company which has 5 suits, and the cards go 1 through 10, page, jack, queen, king, ace.
Don't think that would be compatible. Yeah.
So it has,
that sounds awesome.
So you're saying it has a 1 and an ace?
Yes, because the thing is, he was making it for his kid, and his kids had trouble with the aces, both a 1 and an 11. So when he made the stick for them, it was 5 suits, 1 through 10. Then he wanted to add the page because the page used to be, part of the card deck. So he put that back in. So there's 2 men and 2 women in the face cards, and then he added the ace into it. And until I got that deck, I didn't realize that the standard deck has a numbering system based on the suits. Spades has 1 point, hearts has 2 rounds, clubs has 3 circles, and diamonds have 4 points. So for his 5th suit, he had a 5-pointed star, and I was just like, "Oh, wait a minute!"
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple comments you might want to check out, Kit.
Yeah, the cards make for a really fun system. Darren explained the advantage system and the 8 of allies. It really makes the working together aspect he wanted feel fantastic.
Thank you, Vale. That's very kind of you. Vale's one of my playtesters.
Nice. Well, welcome to the stream.
Yeah, they've been running through Against the Faerie Queene campaign with me, and they're a fantastic role player and an excellent note taker. Incredible note taker.
Great.
Looks like Bardic had a question above that.
Yes, Bardic was asking about are the cards replacing dice?
Yes, they basically, they're, as Kurt said, they're replacing dice, but they also have other purposes as well. And there's important things that they can do that dice can't do. Yeah. For example, it's very difficult to look at a table and see which dice have been rolled and which dice haven't been rolled. Whereas for cards, you can see which cards are face down, which cards are face up. And also there's a lot of fun things we can do with like court cards and that kind of thing that trigger certain events. We have this mechanic called fate cards, which is when the players are in a dire situation where things can get worse over time and anything can happen. Like when you're in a dungeon, or if you're sneaking through a Raxian stronghold, for example. Every round of play, the GM takes 1 card and places it ominously down, face down in front of them, and does so again for the 4 turns. And once you reach 4 turns, you flip them all over. And if there are 2 court cards, then something happens, and the suit of the court card determines what happens as well.
Rising tension.
Yes, rising tension. Yeah, it's wonderfully fun, and a little bit of release once we get there, and then rising again. Yeah, it's gonna be fun.
So do you have any future plans for this, like any source books or any other adventures that you have in mind?
Well, we're just wrapping up Against the Faerie Queene now, which is our big, huge, epic campaign book inspired by Welsh mythology that has 5 epic adventures that follow a single narrative thread between them all. all with different styles of gameplay and set in different locations in Avallen. So we're trying to get that out the door. But in the future, Kurt, we have some ideas, don't we?
Yeah, we've been chatting about exactly what we were talking about earlier, which is going beyond the borders of Avallen a little bit, and exploring more of Ataraxia and their kingdoms, that because they have a huge reach. So giving more information on those cultures beyond the border and our version of our take on Rome and what they do, so that if players want to start adventuring, the connection between the island of Avallen and Ataraxia, they can. But that being said, there's still, we have our book, we have our core book, we have prologues and adventures, and we also have, I guess, Faerie Queene. I think there's also room to explore more also in the island, which we've talked about too, and also the other worlds, because the funny thing about the other world is, like what Darren said, anything kind of goes. But there's a more set mythology of these 5 gods that rule over Avallen, and they have their own sort of Fae courts and their own versions of the other world, which is something that we'd be interested in exploring too in the future. We haven't set on exactly which one to come with next, I think, but I think that's something we'll end up talking to the fans and the playtesters and everyone who's sort of invested in the world to see what they'd like to see next.
Yeah, exactly. So we're kind of going to hit the trifecta of rule book, adventure book, world book, and we're still debating internally whether we're going to keep it, how focused it's going to be, and how big in scope it's going to be. Because obviously, the bigger we make the world, then unfortunately, the thinner it gets in a way, because the book can only have so many pages, right? And
That's gonna be a 4,000-page book, everyone.
It's gonna be a series of encyclopedias. Yeah, you're gonna need 20 books on your shelves. Yeah.
It's gonna be subscription based. Yeah, that's what it's gonna be.
That could be a good model. Maybe we should consider that.
Yeah. Somebody has asked, is there an option for one shots, or is that something the GM will just need to figure out on their own?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's no, 100%. So you have these humble origins that you start with your player, but you can just start. There are suggestions in the rules that, hey, if you want to play, if you don't want to be a humble Celtic farmer or a Raxian guy that's growing up on Avallen, and you want to be like a Roman-inspired commando unit venturing into the other world and slaying Fae and Faerie, then by all means, you can start at level 6, begin your legendary path already, and be at your second tier of your legendary path, and just go on those adventures. There's nothing stopping you. Yeah.
Now, do you have a level cap to your game?
Yes, actually, that's a good question. Yeah, 15. 15. Yeah. And the way the game is structured is you should get the levels are kind of divided into when you gain your level, you gain your new ability, your new power, where you learn something, and then at the half level mark, you gain a new ability point that you get to invest in your character to raise your attributes. And then you gain another ability and then a ability point as you go up level like that way. And it should be about like one short adventure per halfway point as we do. It's kind of like a milestones. Yeah, episodic milestone system. And I had that going into writing the campaign, but then the campaign adventures got so long that I realized that, okay, we need a halfway point as well inside these big adventures. So you gain one full level through each adventure in our campaign book because they're so large. And that's mentioned in the rule book as well for the GMs that they obviously have control over that. It should be a couple of sessions of play basically between each half level. And I'm sure Vale, who's in the chat, is now going to get annoyed at me because we definitely spent 6 sessions and he hasn't leveled up for a while now.
So what if you want to be on the higher end of society, a minor noble or a not so minor noble?
Yeah.
You're on to,
Very good.
No,
that's definitely possible. Like when you start off, you have these 10 professions, and you can start as a socialite, and what that means is, yeah, you can be better off and have some money, but you're not a hero yet. You're still just a person, right? So that's definitely possible.
Yeah.
The person who asked that, I know them.
Are they a noble?
Yeah. Well, no, they like to kind of stretch, they're very interested in temporal influence and stuff like this. So it's like, okay, yeah, so I'm some of the small, from this small village, and start making contacts and friends and having this little network and web of intrigue and stuff like this. So that's kind of their shtick.
Okay, well, I actually could speak to that for a little bit. So we have the 10 professions that you start with at your base level, like I said, socialite, crafter, alchemist, that kind of thing, bard,
Yeah.
scavenger. Then you have the 4 classes that are split between martial and magic. So there's the mystic, there's the mage, there's the warrior and the reaver, which is kind of like the more scrappy kind of fighter, more akin to like a rogue or that kind of thing. And then there's 10 legendary paths that you choose from. And some of those are like solo classes. So for example, if you're a warrior, you become a Taili, which is like a Celtic bodyguard. And that's just a pure warrior kind of class. Or you can become a warrior and then also dual class to a reaver, gain access to the rogue-like fighting style, and become a gladiator, which is like the bridging point between them. And if you're just a reaver, then you could become a you could then learn magic and become a Maleficus. And the people that use intricate, technically difficult to use magic that involve binding spirits to the enemies. That's a combination of like the agility side of the reaver and the spiritual side of the mystic. So you learn how to fight and use magic. And that was in the core game. With this system where you can be just a martial caster, just a martial or martial and a caster, or just a pure caster, for example, a druid or a magister. And then for this adventure book, I wanted to add something else. And I realized I kind of explored the fighting, magic and fighting kind of style. And I realized I wanted to play more with the professions. So like, well, what if you don't want to fight or use magic? What if you just want to stick and be a legendary profession? What does that look like? And I got inspired by history. Well, there's Caesar and there's Boudica, and it's like, well, we actually know they didn't actually have magic, and they probably weren't the best fighters either. They were just really good leaders. So, but they're legends, right? So, what is that? And so we have this paragon legendary profession path, which is like the leaders that inspire people. And I kind of went from there. I thought, well, what else is there? Well, you could be a legendary philosopher, someone who just uses the wit of their minds to get through the world, and they're not using magic, they're not fighting. And then we have this idea of the Enwir. These are like true namers. They don't really use magic as we know it, but they understand and research true names and
Cornish bards.
And then use that against the foes. And then there's the Automofficer. They're legendary crafters who make a giant automaton that they can take into battle with them, but it's not them fighting, it's their creation that's fighting instead. So I guess your friend reminded me of that, because they're talking about being just a talking person and being a noble. Like we're introducing that path to the game as well, and that excites me a lot.
Yeah, you have them spamming our chat with questions now. But yeah, when you mentioned the name magic, though, I was remembering in Shadowrun, like back in first edition, there was a magazine called Challenger magazine, and they would put little expanded rules and stuff. And one of the things that came up was Cornish name magic. And the more you knew the name of something, the more influence you had over it.
Yeah,
and I thought that was just fascinating.
The way we're implementing that, which I like a lot, is that it depends on like how legendary the being is that you're trying to interact with. The GM has like a set of questions about them, and every question you don't know the answer of gives you a disadvantage to discovering their true name and using it against them. So you have to research your target. And if it's just a spoon, well, it's just a spoon, and you know the true name of a spoon, it's pretty easy. But if it's a person, well, you need to know where they're from and their name, their real name, and things like that. And if it's a god, well, there's all sorts of questions you have to understand about them before you might have a chance to kind of do that. So I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the example I tend to use is like, okay, you can say plant, which is then you can go tree, which is a little bit better, then you can go oak, which is a little bit better, then you can go the sacred oak of this culture, and that's where you start getting closer and closer to actually knowing what that tree is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so what they're asking is, how about social food? How about people who can use magic with just their words, charms, illusion, and stuff?
Yeah.
Like, what if you want to be a legendary courtier, someone who walks the halls of power?
Yeah, exactly. Well, do you want to talk about the parlay system a little bit? So we have a social mechanic in the game that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things in the game is when we're parlaying, there's specific mechanics that let you try to have objectives, like saying, "Oh, I'm trying to get so and so to let me into this bar, let me into the bar, or let me into this building." And so when you start parlaying with people, you can overcome their objections to the things like, "Oh, I can't do this because my boss won't let me," or "Oh, I don't trust you," and so on. And so you're encouraged to figure out what the person wants, and just like what you would do in combat, where you're working together to overcome something in the environment or something in their defenses, you're trying to come over their social defenses. And obviously, if you're a courtier or that kind of character that has a better skill, you have a better chance at identifying your sort of social opponents, uh, personality traits and motives and so on. And then once you identify that, you can give reasons to your GM to overcome that, and then you start making your checks thereof. So it's partially role playing, because obviously the better you role play, the more likely your GM is to go, "Oh, that's a good idea," and give you an advantage into that. But you're really incentivized to identify what's up with that person and try to overcome that with your quote unquote social foo. And actually,
Okay,
one
so
of the big adventures. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, you were mentioning the role playing aspect of it. So, what do you do with people who aren't really good socially at the table? Like, I have like two very big introverts. They're very quiet most of the time.
Well, a key part, we mentioned this in the rules specifically, is that, I mean, we don't expect you to be acting. That's not necessary.
Mhm.
As long as you describe what your character is doing and how they do it and what their intent is, that's what matters. Because
Okay,
we're all imagining the game world together at a time. And if I act and orate to you what is my character saying, but I could also say my character speaks passionately,
yeah,
and they bring up these points. That's also still enough to have us that shared experience inside our mind, and that's what matters to us, is the
excellent.
intent of the gamer. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about is like for one game, I always consider social combat to be a very important thing, and somebody over there is mentioning it. The one thing I did, because a lot of people are really scared when you start making social dice rolls and stuff, it's like, well, that's kind of a form of mind control. You're taking away the person's agency. You're forcing the person to role play like this. I passed
Yeah.
my persuasion check, so you have to do that. So what I did was I kind of made a social hit point thing where if you fail a social check, you can go along with what they say, in which case, all right, that's fine. Or you can resist and basically say no. And that's when you start taking social hit point damage, because you're actually resisting. So the player still has that choice. They can go along with it because they lost the die roll, or they can still resist and refuse, but it kind of takes a little bit of their persona effectively to do that. And they can only do that for so long.
Was there a similar system in Legend of the Five Rings, Scott?
Uh, no, there wasn't.
Um, Yeah. Well, actually, our system has something similar where when you're talking to someone, they actually have, when you're trying to do something where there's a chance of failure socially,
Mhm.
they have patience with you.
Yeah.
And so it's very possible for someone to run out of patience with you when you're talking with them. So I guess that would be a form of social hit points.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, it's not about you succeed persuading them, etc. It's not always so binary,
Yeah.
because what you're trying to do is, again, you're trying to identify what their objectives are, but you also create incentives, and that's another way to gain advantages with the other party. And actually, in the upcoming campaign, there's a whole adventure based only on social aspects, with characters who have their own sort of secret motivations and all this
Mhm.
stuff. And one of the mechanics is going to be this idea of, when there's nothing at stake, you can actually gain influence.
Yeah.
And what influence does for them is, it's a kind of social cachet you gain with them that you can cash in later, where a guy when you socialize and you do something really positive, they really like you. And then when the tense time comes to sort of negotiate, their patience with you is higher the more sociable and quote unquote,
The more you can get
how
away
person.
with.
Exactly, precisely. And just like in the combat system, where you're able to exert your armor, it's something you could sort of exert when you do a faux pas or you don't get away with something. But because they liked you so much, like, all right, that's I'll let you have a pass on this one. But it definitely plays out in the same way. It's a kind of parlay combat, which I think is really
You're burning your
interesting.
social capital for it.
Yeah, exactly.
precisely.
Yeah,
precisely.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you answered her
I
question.
think
She was asking if there was any equivalent to weapons and armor breaking for social combat.
Yeah, so
You answered that.
we're really careful about that. Is that actually in the core game, the answer's no at a default. We didn't want the idea of like you could exert yourself to like what does that even mean? So like that's actually taken into a physical territory in a way. But there are certain paths like the bard. Well, the bard can gain social capital by performing very well and gain influence in a crowd, and then they can exert their influence. That's the difference. And then that's exactly what's happening in the games, which is our social political adventure in the campaign book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The person
spoilers,
that
it'd be
was. Go ahead first.
Oh no, I was just saying, it's exactly what Darren talked about. There's going
Okay.
to be little elements where you could participate in sort of the Valak social society and show off how well you could do their version of the reel, of like of a Highland reel, and there are some characters like, oh, they'll be sort of impressed by that if you sort of commit your character to it. So I'm excited to see how people react to that, because I don't know if there's many adventures that focus on that social aspect, and I think hopefully who was that Rachel Ark, whoever was asking that question, I hope they'll get a kick out of it when they finally play through it.
She, speaking of Legend of the Five Rings, she played a Scorpion Clan Shigenja who dipped into courtier, and her big thing was she would cast a spell called Bad Karma, which would cause people to botch their next couple of dice rolls. And then she was using like mind control spells and thing I think is called double tongue, where you're saying one thing and everybody hears that, but you're actually saying something else, which is what the target hears. So she would use that for the mind control. Everything. Oh, it's a nice, pleasant conversation. Meanwhile, she's brain whammying her target, and she was hell in the social circles because being Scorpion Clan, nobody could casting her spells.
I see what kind of player you are, Rachel. You'd want to play a Fey Touched, I think.
Yeah, she probably would.
With the gaining of influence that you were talking about earlier, if a player did want to kind of move up in their social order, do you have a system where they could cash in that influence for renown? And it's basically meaning that you have gained influence with one person, and you spend that, and they actually go out and spread your name to other people. You did mention political, so I was wondering if that could eventually move into a political situation of, hey, I want to run for this particular office in this city and see if I can gain enough influence and renown for that.
Yeah, so there is, in part of the core rules, there is like a really big section that dedicates just to social dynamics in the world. And there's like a hierarchy system there of like what the Valak people, which is our Celtic and Avallen, the Valak people rankings in the society is, and is what their actions are as well. And the key part of the game is that you gain levels by doing legendary tasks in the world. You can't even earn your legendary path without completing certain legendary tasks specific for your path that makes you worthy to go down it in the first place. So the whole point of the game, and even when you level up, you can't level up unless someone has written down or taken a note of your legends that you've earned.
We just got a commercial.
Quest. Yeah. Cool. That's all right.
It happens.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
It just popped up on my end too.
Yeah.
What do you guys see? So you guys see like an indicator to say
quiet? That just popped up.
Yeah. So Kit is just watching the stream. On my technical side, it says ad break in progress. And
okay,
now
we're done.
Back. Yeah.
We're
back.
What was I saying? Oh, so yeah, there's a hierarchy in the world for the different cultures, and there's the whole point of the game is that you're supposed to do these legendary tasks and do on these quests so that your name is known throughout the world. And then as you level up through the game, you get these certain tiers of like adventurer or veteran or hero and legend. And then there's kind of like an equivalent level of where you are on the hierarchy of what you are. Because as an adventurer, you're something different. You're not someone who's working their way up inside the society. You're someone who goes out into the world and makes a name for themselves. And then if you're known just to your village, well, then you're like a leader in that village. But if you're up to this tier, if you're a veteran, well, then people will know you in towns and in taverns and that kind of thing. And then you have the kind of equivalent of, you're like a noble essentially, and you should be able to approach other nobles and be able to meet and talk with them based on your name alone because of your legends. But you're still not going to be able to talk to a Brennan or the emperor, that kind of thing. You have to pick up a legend to get to that level. So it's kind of
Hello,
like built into
Taliesin.
the system. Yeah, sorry.
Hello, Taliesin.
So yes, yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. He turned into a fish. But yeah, so the Legends and the Legends of Avallen is obviously exploring other legends, but really the goal is that you become the legend and you're the guy that everyone talks to. So in the social adventure, yeah, you're using your influence so on, but ideally after that adventure ends, you level up and then you're just better known than you were before is the idea.
I gotcha.
Yeah, so what time period is this? Iron, steel, bronze? Like, are we talking late Roman era? Or maybe it's like into medieval period, but Rome didn't fall?
Yeah, no, this is Iron Age. This is around I guess 60 to 100 years after Rome first set in Britain. Is kind of like our inspired architecture and cultures and that kind of thing. But again, it's our fantasy version. This is Legends of Avallen, not Legends of Britain.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's when it's inspired. In our world, though, I guess we could say in our world, the Raxians have been on Varlic shores now for I think 40 to 50 years. I'd have to double check my own lore, but it's around that time. It's long enough for people. Raxians could have grown up in Avallen and known it as their home.
Yeah, 2 generations.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a history there of how far they advanced in, and where the wars took place, and then where they receded to, and where their territories are, and what clans they were allies with, and who they weren't with, and who fought against them, and recent
so Iron
conquests
Age.
as well. Yeah, Iron Age. Yeah, sorry, that's the answer. Iron Age. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that gives us kind of a good idea of like what the culture is like, what the buildings are like, what the clothing is like, things like that.
Yeah.
But like Darren mentioned, there's a class of people that eventually can make automatons and so on. So there's still some fantastical elements that you'll be able to play around with that are not necessarily that historically accurate, but that's okay because it's a game and fun is just as important as anything else.
I have a friend who's running Pathfinder, but he's running it kind of like on an alter Earth. So we do have the Native Americans and we have the Chinese and stuff, but they're not called that. So he was running one in the Chinese equivalent, and I made an artificer. And his goal, he specialized in constructs. That was his archetype. His goal was to basically to be able to take inventions and introduce it to the public so that anyone could do it. He wanted everybody to have clockwork machines and automatons and this and that and the other. And it's like, sadly, Pathfinder doesn't have an allowance for that, but he was trying to push the tech axiom a bit.
Sounds like a heathen and a troublemaker to me.
Yes.
That's actually a question I had when you mentioned automatons. Are we talking steam powered, magic powered, clockwork powered?
It's kind of a bit of clockwork powered, as in it's mechanical, but there's also kind of some kind of spiritual essence to it that it gives it an animus. Yeah,
it's self-winding.
Yeah.
It's got solar panels.
Yeah, it's got solar.
No, it's water powered because I remember, the Romans would use steam and stuff like this for the like opening doors and such. So you have this automaton and you pour water in the top and then you light a little thing to give it flame. And the water level, you see this water level slowly going down and you have to refill it every now and then.
Exactly. Well, as you like, as the player likes anyway. I mean, our current playtest, he's got one made of wood, which surprised me. He calls them fiddlesticks. So
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Pretty good. Didn't even after there's a League of Legends character named Fiddlesticks. I don't know. Does it? It's like a scarecrow character. Does it horrify people?
It has been vexing people, yes, especially because we're doing the horror adventure at the moment, and this is a very isolated fishing community that don't like outsiders very much. So it's a bit of a sore sight for a lot of locals. Yeah, or at least a point of curiosity anyway.
We have a question. What happens when you finish the path? Is there an intent to retiring? I know a lot of people play other games that want to be maxed out and deal with world-ending events, but with the approach to the classes, is the end game something more realistic? I was thinking about this too, is like, because you mentioned there's 15 levels. I was like, so what happens when you hit 15 and you want to keep going?
Yeah, so there's a capstone ability. You get a choice of your final ability in your legendary path. And the most important thing is that the hero's journey that we talked about earlier, that comes to an end. And that is when you get to decide what kind of legend your character becomes. Are they a legend of like a paragonic legend of virtues, or are they a more complicated anti-hero, as it were? And how you decide that will set up your motivation for why you keep adventuring, if you do want to. I can't remember if we included rules on retiring your character or that kind of thing. But there's no, once you reach level 15, that's as big as it gets, and you're not going to be a god at that level. You're still a powerful hero, but you're not a god.
You're Arthur, you're Mordred, you're Taliesin.
Yeah. Although, to be fair, the gods were once mortals in our world, so there is an avenue there somewhere. But
that sounds like a supplement coming.
Speaking of Arthur,
we'll play. Was it first edition or basic D&D expansion where we create an additional encyclopedia of legends only of and love. So that's definitely a possibility, I guess. And if
the gold
people
box
are clamoring for it, right?
I will.
That's right.
Speaking of talking about legends and stuff like that, King Arthur. I have a friend who was studying King Arthur and stuff because he was actually learning Gaelic, Scottish Gaelic specifically. And he said the old stories of King Arthur were really over the top.
Yes.
People turning into werewolves and picking up impossibly huge things and throwing them around and all this. Does your game go to that extreme, or is it a little bit more grounded?
Yeah, no, it was actually really interesting and challenging as well, delving into the old stories like the Mabinogion in the Welsh mythology, because a lot of the tales aren't written, obviously, with modern sensibilities in mind of cause and effect, and things happen, and there's a plot and a thread, there's a narrative that makes sense. Sometimes things just happen, and it's like, well, why is this happening now? It doesn't matter. We're moving on.
Exactly.
So, in the end, that stuff does happen, but it's always going to be, like I said before, linked somehow to the other world, and there are things there that happen strange and they can't be explained. But when it comes to Avallen as a whole, modern, we want that to have to be grounded and real, but then there's still the fantasy there where things don't make sense and you do have questions and they might not be answered. So we're trying to get our cake and eat it too.
Yeah. The physical world makes sense, but when you start bringing in the spiritual things, go weird.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And I think, sorry, go ahead.
No. I was telling you to go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, well, I think part of that is this idea of when you read those mythologies, right, they're from the point of view of the regular guy encountering these fantastical things. I think that's definitely something that tries to get captured where, as a humble person, is there's gonna be crazy crap happening, but you want to come in from the point of view of someone that isn't used to that. So there'll be, eventually you'll cross, people growing out of plants and giants walking through the water and so on, but it'll always be from the point of view of oh, okay, wow, that's crazy, rather than, oh yeah, I see this every day kind of thing, which sometimes a high fantasy game can sort of delve a little bit too deeply in. And we're not low fantasy, we're middle fantasy. I don't know, maybe that's where I place our game. You're meant to be someone who's not used to magic, but that doesn't mean that you won't see fantastical things and participate in them.
Speaking of magic, you were talking about different magic paths and stuff like this. Is there anything like the equivalent of necrotheurgy and stuff like this? You speak with the dead, not the raising undead minions called them a brand thing, but you speaking with the spirits and stuff like that. Is that something that can show up in the game?
Yeah, 100%, and it's something that does in the campaign, and becomes a very important story point. And in fact, there's a whole adventure there's a whole adventure that revolves around it, actually. So yes, I'll say from a mechanical standpoint, maybe I shouldn't say this because people are fans, but I have a gripe. Maybe you go on.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I don't know if I remember from this podcast if you talked about the general aspects of our campaign and why it's created. So it's basically 5 adventures of different genres. And what Darren mentioned was the horror. It starts off with something called The Hunt, right?
Yeah.
Which is more of this like fantasy hunt of a great creature, and then it branches off into three other adventures. One is the political adventure I talked about, called the Games. One is the horror, which is more of our version of a fantasy horror thing with a really cool. How much can we talk about it, Darren, without giving anything away?
Yeah, well, no, I think I mentioned on the crowdfunding that I was inspired by Majora's Mask and a cult horror film called The Endless, which both have time looping aspects to the plot. So yeah, I think we could talk about that a little bit if
Sure,
that's what you're
yeah.
referring to.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a horror time travel conceit that the players have to go through, and that Veloframe says that it's their favorite one so far, the genre. So they're having a lot of fun with it. One of our playtesters.
So you could, for example, as a player, get to a point where you learn magic. You can pick like effectively necromancy, but that doesn't necessarily have to be like, oh, you're evil type thing. It could be like, I put the dead to rest, you know, I get rid of ghosts, I talk with them and to find out what's going on, stuff like that.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, actually, in the rules of the game, mechanically, there is a class that called the Maleficus, and they manipulate and bind spirits to the will. Whether that's good or benevolent, I think that's up to you to decide. The spirits that you gain control of are the ones that are kind of rejected by the gods, the ones that haven't been taken into the Everone's embrace and crafted into a Fae or more benevolent creature. So these are the spirits of your murderers, your slavers, that kind of thing. So if you're putting them to good use in the good works that you're doing, then one might say you're putting them to rest in a way. Yeah.
Redeeming them.
Redeeming them, exactly. Yeah.
Oh,
we don't have an alignment system, so it's based mostly on the motivations of characters. I think it's just assumed that you're a hero. So just like in the olden days when you read stories, that's what heroes used to do. They used to smite people, smite things. God used to come down and flood people, and everyone loved them for it.
Yeah. Speaking of that kind of stuff, I've always been fascinated with religion in role-playing games. Most of my characters are super pious, even if they're not like character stuff. I had a fighter who followed the goddess of luck in Pathfinder. She's counted good, and he was lawful neutral. And she's like, "What is wrong with you?" But how do you handle like different faiths and stuff in your setting?
Well, the primary. Well, Kurt, can you speak to this a little bit first?
Yeah, so in our world, there's primarily 5 gods, and that, I guess the mythology is basically that at the beginning of the world, or the beginning of the sort of timeline, there's these great beasts called Faerie, who are like the archetypical dragon, archetypical giant type creatures terrorizing the world. And eventually normal humans got sick of it, and there were 5 humans that rose up from like their various tribes and approach them and basically sacrifice something in their lives to destroy these monsters. But upon dying, and because of sort of the faith put into them by their tribes and their clans people, they were able to sort of mix their essences with these creatures and ascend into godhood. So the gods of these worlds are called the Everones, and they were once mortal hero legends that basically slayed these archetypical beasts and ascended to godhood. And they used to walk the earth, but there was a time when they realized that a lot of divine power is based on belief, and they started warring with each other to become more powerful. And at a point, they realized it was untenable, and so this divine Briandel, or these sort of gods, divine godhood, decided to make something called the Everpact, where they left the mortal realm and created their courts purely in the divine Anwin in the other world. So their presence still felt through their agents and their avatars and so on. But their kingdoms are no longer in the mortal realm, and that was centuries ago. But the current Valak people, they still worship these gods. And that's why, so the sort of intermixing with, that's actually a big interesting, I think, dynamic that's different with our history and real world history is that the Rexians who come over, who are like of the Romans, like I mentioned before, they used to have that, but they sort of killed their god. So their other world is this kind of dusty, decrepit place where now when you die, it's not, you don't become a fairy, you don't become you basically become, they don't really know, they don't really care about their their other world anymore. It's
Which is
nothing.
very interesting
but
considering the Roman view of afterlife with the mayor and their ancestors and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I was
Yeah.
inspired by it to go this way for two reasons. One is obviously there's the clash of cultures, and I really wanted to amp that up even more. And I like the idea of the Raxian culture being this logical, methodical thing, and that kind of comes into contrast with the spirituality of the Druids and that kind of thing. And the Romans did have this effect where they kind of did kill the local religions in a way. That is something that happened, or at least they tried to do. So there was that part of it too. But also, if you look at like the Greek mythology, this is a story that happens in a way. There's the Titans, right, that exist.
Kind of Maki, yeah.
And then there's the gods beneath them that kill the Titans and get rid of the old gods and replace them with themselves. And then this is just a continuation of that. Is that then, well, what if other people come up and rise and kill the gods? What happens then? Well, that they banish the Titans. What happens if we banish the gods? We just take that one step further. Is kind of where I got inspired for it. Yeah.
So you mentioned the five gods and the five beasts and all this kind of stuff. So is that a global system, or is that just a local system? I mean, like, do you have the equivalent of the Egyptians, Pasajet, or the Asatru, or the Kami, or things like that?
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of this campaign. As I said earlier, we're now prodding out into the rest of the world, and we're answering these questions for ourselves. And I actually had to consider a couple of days ago what happened. So there's five gods, and there's the five clans that each primarily worship the one god, because that god was immortal from their clan. And there's the ever stranger, who's the god of death. So the five gods have a familial relationship. There's the ever mother, ever father, ever child, ever elder, and then there's the ever stranger, who's outside the family in a way.
Woohoo, ever stranger.
And he's the god of death and revelry and trade and things like that.
I like him already. Death and revelry.
Yeah, and I had to ask myself, what happens to a Raxian spirit when they die in Avallen? Where do they go? How does that work? And I had to answer that question. I was like, bloody hell, I have to decide now. What make a big decision about this world law.
It's very funny in Legend of the Five Rings.
Yeah, and so I decided that these Varlic gods have domain over Avallen, and then there's kind of like this, some kind of pushing barrier. And if the Avallic faith moved into the mainland, the gods would come with it. But it's not there, so they aren't there either. So it's going to be where the faith is and who has belief in what area is how they gain power, and what is there is what will be there. So when we go to our Egypt, what the people believe in there will be what there is. That will be real for them. And so there is that aspect of that conquering aspect. It's like, okay, well, if we can conquer these other people and instill our beliefs in them, then it'll become real for them and our gods will spread. So there is that kind of natural conflict there. And the Raxians would love for the Varlic to gain ataraxia and become essentially atheists in a way, and kill their gods in that way.
Do they understand what they did?
Yeah, no, it's a period. So essentially that fight that happens in Avallen, where the gods ward each other for worship over other peoples and to gain converts and to kill their worshippers so that our god could be stronger, because they have less worshippers and we convert people so we can become stronger. That when it's this tumultuous time that Kurt was talking about called the Sorrows, where the gods were at war and everyone was at war and it was awful, and they realized it and they said, no, we need to stop this because people are going to lose belief in us because all we're bringing is conflict and death. So they signed this agreement that Kurt said, the Everpact. The same kind of thing happened in the Raxian culture, and they didn't stop and they kept going. And then it got into a situation where, just like as the Titans caused torment to the mortals, well, now the gods were as well, and the people said, no, we're not going to have this. We're going to fight you. We're going to rise up against you in belief. came down, so the gods became weaker. So then the heroes could kill them. And then when they did, they denied the divinehood. They didn't want to take up that mantle and become gods themselves because they saw what happened and they exiled their gods. And now
Okay, so they're fully aware that they wiped out their own pantheon and
Yeah.
everything that follows through.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, that makes sense. So
But there are always people that want to bring them back, right?
Yeah, of course.
Cults that have to be stamped out because, dangerous magics.
Yeah. So, could you make a hero from that culture who basically is trying to push the idea of basically the legend of reason, so to speak?
Yeah, they become a legendary philosopher and don't use magic. And yeah, I mean, again, I don't want to do spoilers, but
I wasn't thinking philosophy. I was thinking kind of like a champion of order type thing, where it's like, yes, all this paganism and all this mythology and stuff like this. This is bad, and I will spread this idea of whatever it is that they believe.
Then yeah, that would be another legendary profession path, the Paragon. They're pushing forward a cause that they want to influence the world with. That's your Boudica, that's your Caesar kind of character as a political influence out there. Yeah, and there is a theme of aeside in the campaign book, and I would say more than that, but yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Do we have any questions in the chat? I feel like it's been a while since we checked in.
No, I've been keeping an eye on it. Not so much. I think people are just kind of listening and absorbing this kind of stuff. I have to say, though, this sounds amazing. I am really impressed with the idea.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, I got a character from 7th Sea, and I'm wondering, could I cross that over? Would they be able to build this character? There's a group called the Children of Lu. They're the male equivalent of the Sophia's Daughters, and they have Fey blood in them. So this kid had Fey blood. He gets taken off by a druid, and he learns from I think it's like he learned from Robin Hood. He learned from a famous swordsman from legend, and he learned from this guy who likes to punch things. I forget what the name of the 3 heroes were, but he was taught by legendary heroes. Then he left the woods and came back into society. So he's this little kid who's got like super strong because he's a walking myth in the making. And I was wondering if you could do something like that, like basically a normal kid goes out.
Oh, I see. It reminds me of Kahulain.
Yeah, sort of like that.
Yeah. So
the kid who beat 40 guys in a sporting event.
Yeah.
If you remember that, everyone's like bullying him, and he I forget what it's called. It's like the equivalent of soccer or rugby or whatever. And he just beats 40 other children in a sporting match.
We had basically a 16-year-old who would pick up wagons casually and carry them places because he liked to do that.
Yeah, so a key part of the legendary paths that you'll want to take is that to unlock your abilities in legendary path, you have to perform legendary trials that make you worthy of your path. And they are particular to your path, but a lot of them have overlap. So one of them will be best another member of your path, for example, and that usually means finding a mentor figure and training under them, and then one day overcoming them, right? Or finding an artifact that revolves around your path. So that's very much built into the system of that. Yeah, you're encouraged to find mentor figures and spend time with them to go on your journey. So yeah, that's definitely a part of it.
Okay. So with the way you've explained the game, so he'd be level -3, I think is what you
said.
Oh,
we're making your character? Sure.
No, just I'm running through my head how this would go. So he'd be -3 at 8 years old. He gets taken off by the druid. He goes through a number of trials, which would be role played out.
Yeah.
And then by the time he hits like 15 or 16, he would be of a level where he's on his legendary path.
Yeah,
which is when he'd be joined society. I see how this would work out. Okay. I don't know if the other players would be interested. Okay, so we have an 8-year-old in the party, and he's doing what now?
You should all be 8 and 9-year-olds and like started like a Goonies type adventure, and then from there you guys become the heroes.
Oh my gods! And then you have one of the players become Pan, as in Peter Pan. I could see that too.
Well, there's the ever child is the
exactly
is a forever child who managed to trick the giants, the Kaur. And that's how he bested them. And they are the god of tricks and potential.
Oh, I love this. I can't wait to pick this up. This sounds great. You're hitting all the key points that I find fun.
Yeah. Yeah, well, but that was part of it as well, is looking at all the different gods that we know of in Celtic mythology. And it's like, well, again, we're not doing histories, but I wanted to tie them. So I just took them all. I have a way back when we made the game like 4 or 5 years ago now, when it first we started it, and I just wrote a list of all the Celtic gods and their aspects, and kind of said, okay, these guys can put into the Everchild and the Evermother, and we're gonna have five. Five's enough, but they're gonna have all these different aspects. Yeah.
Oh, aspects is a good part of it. It's what I did with one of my settings. It's like, yeah, in this culture, this is their aspect. In this culture, this is their aspect. In this culture, and that way you can have like multiple pantheons. They're the same people, just different faces.
Yeah.
Yeah, which works on a local level. So if you get too far out, then strange stuff starts happening.
Yeah, but that's that could be a lot of fun too, right? It's sometimes you want to get weird.
Yeah, well, when I was studying Japanese mythology, I learned that Inari is a composite god made of like a whole bunch of different gods worshipped as one being. So for one of the cultures where the PCs went, I was like, yes, okay, so this is inspired by Japan, and this is the Japanese faces for some of these gods, except for this one person who is the composite god, except that they showed up as their own person, and this is confusing everybody, including the Pantheon. It's like, where did this person come from?
I see a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, then this is from our playtester, Darren. So maybe you should field this one.
Okay, no, we've got here. Do you think there's potential? Yeah, do you think there's future potential to have some expanded content where you too engage in some journey that can end with you becoming one of these literally former human gods?
Apotheosis.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm
keen,
Darren.
What do you think? Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think like we were talking about before, there's still a lot of other stuff to expand on. But I definitely think that's like a fun idea, because everyone wants. I get that. I mean, there's a lot of different players, and I do think some players want to sort of explore the bleeding edge of what a campaign is possible. And because Legends of the Past became gods, hypothetically, it's also possible in our world, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see it being outside the
canonically speaking, and looking from within the world lore, we have this situation at the moment, at least, where there were these 5 Faerie, these monster beings, the Makalevi, the Drake, the Coward, the Avank, and the 5 progenitors of these like families of essentially demonic entities were killed, and 5 gods rose in their place. So it was 5 for 5. So it seems that there's this essence being passed down. So if you want to get that, you're going to have to take on a god in the first place. You're going to have to dethrone them. At least that's what it seems to be at the moment. But then again, I mean, we also know that there's gods exiled in hiding in Raxia, so their power's diminished, but it's still there somewhere. Maybe you could find that and bring it back. So there's potential. Yeah, you're gone.
I haven't talked to Darren about this, so this is brand new information.
Yeah,
but I always thought it'd be fun if when we do eventually get to our Rex campaign, either that or doing something else. I always thought it'd be fun to do the fall of Ataraxia. So rather than the Vizas coming, like Avallen could reach out and you could run a campaign where you're the ones who overthrow and sack Rome, so to speak. And maybe for that you can choose not old. But that's we haven't talked about that yet. We're not sure yet. We're
So you were talking about players want to go to the bleeding edge of what is possible. It's kind of like the Epic Handbook that came out for 3.5, effectively. It's like, yes, the normal campaign goes to this point, and we can do more over here, but that's not where you usually go. Rachel mentioned there's a role-playing game from France called Kuro, which was J-horror set in the far future. And I was like, oh, this is great. I love J-horror. I love, post-humanism and all this kind of stuff, transhumanism and everything like that. And it hit all the proper beats. It was 3 books. And the 3rd book is like, okay, well, the character story is told because each book has a continuation of the previous story arc. And now that the story is told, we're done. That's it. No more books. And I was like, wait, what? Because at the end of the 3rd book, effectively, you become sort of like legendary mythic figures who have reincarnated into the modern age. And that's where they stop the campaign. So you've made it,
Right, you're
but
the legend now. Yeah, yeah.
but there's nothing else.
There's nothing else to tell. Yeah.
Yeah, but they're like, yeah, you can continue to play with this kind of stuff, and here's the rules for it. But we're not going to tell you about what the world is like, or what culture is like, or how you changed anything just by existing. And then they're like, oh yes, in the other countries outside of Japan, they're having this too, and we're not going to tell you anything about it because the campaign has been told. And I'm just like, ooh.
And in a way, like this is kind of already in our world's lore in a way. Like the gods themselves are the legends of legends. They're the fathers and mothers of their respective clans. They're literally the deities, but now they have such a backseat role because they tried to continue meddling in affairs. They tried to keep being that hero doing stuff, but it doesn't work. And the people rebelled and they had to take a step back and say, no, we're going to retreat to our domain.
Can you do heroic reincarnation in your campaign?
Reincarnation is a part of the world lore, yeah, and that
awesome. Okay.
People that pass on move into the other world, and their spirits are there, and those that are deemed worthy are shapen by the gods into the Fae, and those that aren't are left to wander and be subject to the malevolent forces that reside there as well. And then when they die, there's this implied thing that they might be reborn as people or animals, so that's not certain.
Okay.
Yeah,
because they don't know either, like they don't know where they go 100%. It's not a it's still murky. It's but yeah, it's but what you're touching on it, like talking about I get I think what Darren was talking about. I think I also understand that from the point of view of once you become a god and like where do you go from there? Well, yeah, for sure, go to another planet or something like that. But the stories that we love as humans, we want to hear stories of people from rags to riches or underdog to heroes. And those, I think fundamentally, that's where this game came from, right? And that's like the fundamental story that's interesting to everybody, I think.
I would say that's a very Western mindset because, like in North America specifically, the rag from riches, the underdog thing, that is the stories that seem to get the most traction, and it's what everybody likes to see. They want to see basically, it's like, yes, I was right all along. I had to work my way up to prove it type thing. Where like when I look at a lot of anime and Japanese stories and stuff like this, where it's not J-horror, you will have characters. It's like from day one, it's like, yeah, they're one of the most powerful things walking. And the story becomes, well, what's the consequences of their choices as opposed to the rising to power because they're already there. So it's like, well, I do this thing. Well, what's the repercussions? Well, I do this other thing to try to fix it. Well, what's the repercussions of that? And that's the kind of storytelling I tend to see there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, in Japanese mythology too, like the most popular story here is Momotaro, right? Like, having lived here and experienced a lot of stories that I have here, that's still that story of the small child who comes from nothing. Yeah, he's mythical and he's obviously special or whatever.
Yeah,
but he raised from meager means and then rises up to become this legend. That
in his case though, you wouldn't really call him an underdog.
Well, I mean, like I guess I'm talking from the point of, obviously heroes are special, but but he's still raised by Oba-chan and Oji-chan and
well, that just means he's humble.
Then sure.
Oh yeah, humble origins. Yeah. That's what it's about. Yeah,
humble origins. That's important.
Yeah, one of the things with D&D, it's always I've had a lot of DMs that like, well, you're going to start off from nothing. You're a peasant or some other lower person that's just wearing rags. I'm like, yeah, what if I want to be a baron's kid? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Can you do that? I mean, what would that mean? And I'm like, exactly. There's society is a lot more than just the rags to riches. You can have heroes come from all walks of life. So how would you do it in D&D or Fantasy Age or whatever? It sounds like your game, though, actually has that fairly figured out, so that's cool.
Yeah. I think just like linger on rags to riches. It's more humble to humble origins to legend.
Yeah. Yeah, like you could be the son of a baron, and you have all the influence of that, but you're not anything special yet.
Yeah, you still need to make a name for yourself. The people in the town over might not have heard of you, and that's
yeah.
You need to take advantage of nepotism. So I'm keeping an eye on your guys chat there. I think Velfrain has another question for you, Darren. That the mage has a time spell that lets you move a target back to the state of being in the previous turn. Are you worried that with decent successes, this could be exploited?
Wait, are you serious? Is he really asking me that in the chat?
Yes, he is.
No, there's a spoiler.
Wait, what? No, wait, where is this? Oh, let me find this Twitch chat.
The spell list is smaller than some of the games. It is open to flavorings that make it have potential outside of the mechanical. I had so much fun with time magic in a friend's campaign.
Yeah, so you move the target back to the state of being for his turn. Are you worried that with decent successes, this could be exploited? What do you mean exploited? I mean, yeah, that's the point of magic, is it breaks the laws of physics. And yeah, you're encouraged to exploit it. Spells are difficult to cast. People know when you're casting them because you make noises and motions and that kind of thing. Yes, I want that to be exploited, and it's up to you to figure out how you want to exploit it. Yeah, that means him back over and over. The same point is, no, by all means. But good luck with all those successes. Yeah.
I had a character with a time mage like kind of thing, and what he would do is he had a spell set up so that he'd fire his crossbow bolt, and through temporal shenanigans, it would hit the target in 8 different parts of their body at the same time.
Sorry, I missed part of that, but that sounded crazy.
The idea, like what he would do is, because he understood the principles of time and space, he'd have a crossbow and he'd fire a bolt, pick the target, and the crossbow would hit them at like 8 different points through temporal magic at the same time. Or he would use time magic to hyper accelerate it so he can shoot further than its normal range, or hit harder, or stuff like this. The game master got rid of the time magic after that. I was a playtester.
Did you then say "Omawa mo shinderu"?
Yes, we're already dead.
It's nothing personnel, kid.
Yeah, and then of course somebody asks you, how do you do that? Sore wa hibitsu desu.
Well, everyone, and it is 7 p.m., and I know some of you are up super late and some of you are up super early. Do we want to call it here?
Yeah, I think this was the agreed end time.
Yeah. Anything you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, Against the Faerie Queene are epic Legends of Avallen and D20 compatible campaign book of 5 awesome adventures of different genres and themes setting a Celtic fantasy world will be out shortly. I think there's if you just search for Against the Faerie Queene, and that's Queen spelled with an E at the end, inspired by the epic poem by Edmund Spenser. If you search for Google that, you'll find the pre-order store. The pre-orders will be stopping in, I think, about 2 weeks. So get it while it's hot. After that, you'll have to get it from Modifius directly, and it should be in print and in stores January, February, and out to backers far sooner than then. Yeah.
And where can they find you?
Where can they find me? I must admit, I've kind of retreated from social media a bit, but we have a Twitter. You can always at me up there at Avallen Legends. You can find me on Facebook as well if you search for Legends of Avallen. If you search for Legends of Avallen Against the Faerie Queene, you'll find my website where all the details are. But primarily, we hang out on Discord and have a little community there, and everyone's welcome to join in there. And you'll find the links if you look for them. Yeah.
We'll put the links on on YouTube with everything. We'll put it into the notes for everyone.
Yeah.
Just give us,
you want to add?
Just give us the URL and we can set that up. And yes, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just and even after this, we have other things in the works too. I think we're working on some games that are. Don't worry, we haven't left Avallen forever, but I think the next game we're working on, we're excited about, is going to be more of a party casual game. That's going to be a lot of fun, but I'm not at liberty to talk about it right now. So keep in touch with Adderstone Games, and you'll see news on that in the very, very near future, I want to say.
Yeah, 100%.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. This was a great talk.
Yeah, I heard this a lot.
Very excited for this game.
Buddy, stay safe out there.
Excited to hear your thoughts on it.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Diolch yn fawr.